Hi.
Hi.
This is Discussion in Jewish Thought, our series on prayer. Now, last week, we looked at a personal, meaningful approach to even coming towards framing towards prayer. And this time, that's your take, Simi's take, is once you're approaching prayer and you know your space vis-a-vis the one you're praying to, what are some of the mechanics in the actual process of praying?
Okay, so what I was thinking of maybe as one approach, because when it comes to prayer, there's obviously going to be more esoteric or more Kabbalistic ways of explaining what a person might be doing, but you don't see that, which means integrating it into your actual experience of prayer is probably going to be quite hard. And perhaps a way of articulating a relationship between the individual and prayer is first to look at the word itself. The word itself is what we say when a person goes to pray, lehit palel.
Tefillah, or ani holechet lehit palel. I'm going to
hence
pray.
The word tefillah, which is
Tefillah,
to pray.
lehit palel.
Which we use the word to pray, even though the word prayer as a translation doesn't do it justice, because that already has embedded in it the idea of a request.
Prayer.
But if we step back, so this word lehit palel, or palal, or tefillah, at its root is the word, or the root, palal.
Pei, lamed, lamed.
Which means to judge.
Palal means to judge. And hit, before the palal, hit palel, means
to self-judge.
Right, because hit means on yourself, like lehit labesh, to get yourself dressed.
Correct.
Okay, so hit palel, self-judged.
So it's an interesting way of looking at prayer, that you're self-judging. Now, a person can say, okay, how am I, maybe when I ask for forgiveness, or well, how am I self-judging? But from no, definitely not, because confession is the outpouring of the self. The confession is outpouring from what's in, out. And if you think about what a person does when he prays, especially from the Jewish standpoint, he's not outpouring his inner soul. It's not an outpouring, it's a bringing in. You're looking at the same things again and again, you're reading the same things again and again. It's putting what's outside in, not what is inside out.
So then what do you mean self-judging? When you say self-judging, I think confessional, because this confessional, this church expects me to be pure and righteous, and I wasn't, so I'm judging that and I'm pouring it out in the confessional.
So
that's self-judging.
So self-judging in reference to what you're saying. When a person prays, they read from the prayer book, they read from the Siddur these different ideas. It is only meaningful to discuss what these ideas mean if you think they're supposed to have an effect on you. To paint out the picture, when I talk about atachonin lo'adam das,
which is in the silent prayer, saying that God is the one who bestows wisdom.
So if I look at that and I hold that up as a principle, I judge how do I stand in reference to that concept. Do I live up to those divine moral principles that I'm supposed to
have I been using my wisdom for the right purposes?
Do I act as if my wisdom is from God?
Ooh.
How do I reflect as an individual these principles? I step out of my day and I reflect, how do I live up to these principles?
That is very different from the confessional. Because the confessional is my own ideas that I think are wrong. And here you're saying it's an objective thing we're judging ourselves against.
Because a person can say, why in the world do I have to say the same things every single time? A person can say, why can't I just tell you what's within me? But that's completely missing this aspect of what prayer is doing. Prayer isn't outpouring. There's a place for that within Tefillah, of course, but as a primary system of growth from a Jewish standpoint, that comes from seeing how I as an individual live up to these principles I'm saying. So when we talk about how a certain idea within prayer gives over a certain meaning, when a person says that they pray, they're saying, how do I live up to these principles? They judge themselves in reference to these concepts.
So when you're saying ani holech lehit palel, what you're saying is that I am opening up this book, which hopefully we're going to discuss what these things actually mean, like atachone. I'm opening up this book rather than my own feeling of inadequacy or wanting to do better, and I confess. I'm opening up an objective book that's the same for everybody, and I lehit palel, I'm self-judging myself, how I stand in these things.
In reference to these ideas.
And
you can see how growth takes place from that.
How so?
I am imbuing, to parallel it a different way, balal, which is another root that's related to this, means to take a mixture, two things, and a mix together that creates a new idea, a new concept, a new entity.
Like yellow Play-Doh and white Play-Doh makes light yellow Play-Doh.
Correct.
Got it, okay.
The more sophisticated example of two colors coming together.
Red and blue.
What does that make?
Purple.
Purple, excellent. So, in justice, the same thing should be taking place. Justice in its ideal sense...
Wait, why justice?
Because...
Palal, to judge, okay.
Justice shouldn't be just the separating of two ideas or two arguers. It should be the judge imbuing from outside, like just the parallel with prayer. There's this concept from the outside. The judge from the outside should imbue the idea of justice.
But usually
and there the two people become in agreement because a judge gave perspective.
When I go to somebody and I bring him to a judge, I do not agree with him.
Well,
I'm very separate from him.
So hopefully...
He scratched my car.
So hopefully the ideal judge
would
be able to show you both the truth. And it's an ideal concept of justice, obviously, but we are dealing with the divine here. The idea of justice is supposed to be imparted, which then creates a new entity of unity.
I don't think that's so ideal, because think about it. If it's a Jewish judge, and I am committed beyond anything else, beyond my car, to serve God.
Right.
And so is the guy who says I scratched his car.
Yeah.
No, he scratched my car.
Yeah.
So is the guy who scratched my car.
Yeah.
Has serving God as his highest priority.
Yeah.
Then if we both come together, we don't agree, but if this judge can show us how each of us can serve God in whatever way, making retribution, forgiving, etc., then yes, we will emerge friends, because now we're both serving God.
But that
by listening to this
way
judge.
Of putting it. But
and
that's
then we
an external.
are Balal. We are then a new entity.
So that's what happens with justice in an ideal sense.
And now, okay, so bring it back to prayer.
So like the judge is taking an external idea and imbuing it onto an argument, you as an individual
I like that.
are taking...
external idea, imbuing it onto an argument. That's brilliant.
So when we reflectively judge ourselves during prayer, we're taking external ideas and see how do I live up to them. And through the practice of doing that on a daily basis, you can see yourself as a regiment growing or not growing in reference to these principles or these values that you hold to be dear.
It's very different from...
And when I say you hold to be dear, I mean you've chosen
the path.
You've chosen the idea of Judaism.
Okay, so then that's very different from a confessional, because in confessional it's you're coming in, and here it's you're almost studying your path to take.
It might be a dry way of putting it, that it's just it's not what we're trying, it's supposed to be...
It is a very personal path, but it's also an objective.
Right, so I suppose a person has to A, be committed to these ideals, I mean these values that he wants to imbue into his psyche. That's the point of what the Siddur is trying to do.
And there's a huge amount of stuff there. But that you could also, a synagogue is known as a shula, and I'm from Switzerland. A shula means school. It's not a temple. It's not your pinnacle of your religious expression. It's the school, because you're supposed to learn, you're supposed to judge yourself there to then emerge a better person.
So
yeah,
it's beautiful. So the school of shula is a place where you're supposed to,
like a shul,
imbue into yourself, like you do when you go to school, imbue from external to internal to become a better student, but in this reference, to become a more worthy moral individual in line with the goals of the Torah.
A good teacher does that. A good teacher doesn't just blah information, takes the student and brings another principle in until the student really internalized it.
So do you want to recap it and see if we're on the same page?
Do you want to recap it maybe? Because there was a lot of, I think you'll do a better job.
So in essence, the idea of prayer is not this outpouring from within out. It's at its root, it's seeing what is external, these principles that we come from in the Siddur, why we repeat the same thing again and again, and why we have these distinct ideas being articulated, is because we're judging the self, palal. We're judging the self in reference to these ideas. How do I stand up in reference to these principles that I am looking at? So when a person teaches a person about prayer, it becomes directly meaningful, because it becomes an added component of the idea of tefillah. It's not saying words. You're taking ideas that you've appreciated, and you're saying, how do I live up in reference to them? I judge myself in reference to these principles.
Beautiful. Do you know what I just realized? Yeah. That means that if you have a inspiring spiritual experience while you're praying, that's wonderful. But according to this principle, that prayer was only useful if you became a more inspired person because of it. If all you're doing is having inspiring prayer sessions, but you don't become a more giving, humble person, then that's not a shula. Then that's not lehit palel. Then that's spiritual exercises.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I hear that.
Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you for listening. Next time, we're going to dive in to the first prayers we say in the morning. See you then.